and welcome to Synthesized Sunsets. Today is going to be an intro episode to the spring season of the magazine. So Kevin, can you tell us what changes we can expect moving forward?
Yeah, for sure. So the change that's probably going to be most relevant to our podcast listeners is that we are going to get a mic upgrade, not in this episode, obviously, but in our next episode. And the reason for this change, other than it just kind of being a good thing for us to do, is that we are actually going to be starting a YouTube channel. And on this YouTube channel, you can expect us to be going over some of the essays that have been published in the magazine previously and giving a little bit of a relaxing commentary on it as well as a relaxing reading. So it'll probably be a pretty slow process to get up to date with where the magazine's currently at, but it'll be a nice way to revisit some of the issues that you may have missed. And so hopefully you can look forward to that. We'll be posting links in the description to podcast episodes as these videos are released. In other news, we're also going to be having a renewed focus on fiction. So both Gordon and myself are pretty interested in writing fiction and actually getting it published in mainstream speculative fiction magazines. But we're sort of unsure how to make that work exactly with what we're currently doing. And so what we decided to do is we're actually going to try to write essays that inspire us to write certain stories that we then send out to publication. So if we have an essay that's a little bit more futurism focused, you can expect that there might be a story based on that theme coming out in the future. So I guess if if they don't do that well, then you can maybe use the magazine. But ideally, we'll be able to link them in the post and say oh, here we are being published in Apex magazine or something. But so that's the ideal. So you'll also see a bit of that, and then also us maybe trying to hash out some story ideas right here on the podcast. And then a final change that we're going to have to the magazine this season is that we are going to be focusing a little bit more on criticism of contemporary works because the Hugo Awards is coming up in August in Seattle. Both of us will be attending. And since some of our listeners might not be super familiar with the Hugo Awards, maybe have heard of it, but don't know how it works, we thought we would talk a little bit about that. So basically, the Hugo Awards are generally considered to be the most prestigious award in speculative fiction, and it is a popular award that is voted on by the attendees of a convention called Worldcon, which is held every year. And this year, it just happens to be in Seattle, which is where I am located. So both myself and Gordon will be attending, and we will also be voting. And so in preparation for this, we're going to be talking about what we thought about the nominees in the main speculative fiction categories, and just telling you whether or not we like them, stuff like that. For what Worldcon is like itself, it's not as public facing as something like Comic-Con might be. It's a little bit more insular and designed primarily for writers and other creatives. And so it's usually a pretty small group. I think there's, maybe about 6,000 attendees, I want to say, for this worldwide fantasy. If you think about this in the grand scheme of all speculative fiction fans in the world, probably a pretty small number. But it very much is by writers and for writers. So it's maybe a sort of hybrid between a popular choice award and something like the Academy Awards. On some level, it is the Academy of speculative fiction to some degree, but it's just an academy that is particularly easy to enter and is much smaller. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Gordon.
Yeah, not too much. Neither of us have read as of now too many of the Hugo Award books, so we're kind of planning over the next few months to read them all pretty much, and you'll hear our reactions to the ones that we read on the pod, I'm sure, and we'll have them in articles as well. But yeah, nothing too much to add.
And with luck, we'll maybe be able to get some of the authors on the podcast as they do their whole book tour, make the rounds, try to run their book campaign. Generally, it doesn't take a ton of votes compared to other campaigns to get, especially a nomination, but even a winner. And so a lot of times authors will really try to get people who are going to the convention to to read their book and say good things about it. So yeah, I mean, certainly if we like a book, we'll try to get the author
Yeah.
on.
I'm a bit concerned about our level of criticism, which I expect to be probably on the harsher side. Not that we're particularly ungenerous, but I don't know. We'll see. That
I don't know. I
it
think
might
we might.
it might conflict with us getting wanting to talk to some of the authors at the very least. We'll see though.
I think we might be kind of ungenerous.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I honestly don't know how it'll be.
Maybe they'll all be bangers. Well, yeah. Well, anyway, without further ado, let's talk about the theme. So, the theme for this particular issue is rebirth. And the art style that we are going to be talking about in conjunction with that is Art Nouveau. So Gordon, what comes to mind when you think about rebirth?
Yeah, I think there's a few different contexts to think about rebirth. The first is a more personal context, a more like reincarnation or something. And in that sense, it has sort of a religious kind of sense to me, in which, you're literally like being reborn. It's a very literal thing. But I think in sci-fi in general, and probably what we're going to be exploring thematically more here on the podcast and the magazine, is a more civilizational, grand type of rebirth. A civilization rising from the ashes of something that's been fallen, or even something like the changing of the seasons with spring coming in a dead landscape, which is fitting for this being a spring issue. And with Art Nouveau in particular, that's kind of more the sense I get, like this pastoral, natural sense of rebirth occurring.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, yeah, I think when I think about rebirth, I guess for whatever reason, I think about it in less bodily terms. I mean, maybe this is something to do with me not identifying with my own body particularly strongly, but I think that to me, like rebirth is more about when like the core of your identity changes or is rearranged in some way, when your soul is kind of unrecognizable. I think that situations where you sort of emerge and your new self is sort of unrecognizable to your old one. And I think that speculative fiction in particular allows some really interesting explorations of this that are just not possible in realistic fiction, which we are going to talk about. But before we do that, I want to talk about Art Nouveau, which is probably one of my new favorite art movements. Um, so, as a bit of an introduction, Art Nouveau came around the turn of the 20th century, and it was basically an effort to, I guess you could say, modernize art. They wanted art to like be able to detach from tradition somewhat and reflect this new modern technological streamlined age that we now live in. And to that end, they wanted it to not just be paintings that rich people looked at, but embedded into everyday life. And so Art Nouveau is probably most well known for influencing architecture and interior design. Like there are a lot of Art Nouveau rooms that are in Europe, like Art Nouveau staircases, Art Nouveau facades. But they're also quite interested in things like household objects, like chairs, and like advertisements and labeling and stuff like that. And so I guess you could think of Art Nouveau as being kind of like spiritually mass produced and commercialized, almost like Andy Warhol esque. But Art Nouveau explicitly didn't want to be like that. Like they wanted their art to be more humanistic and not super mechanical. They still wanted to have that romantic element. And so as a result, in Art Nouveau, you have these really flowing, organic, natural lines and vibrant colors. And I think that it's a pretty good fit for the magazine in the sense that they were trying to inspire this rebirth of art in general, but also they draw from a lot of natural and mythical themes that are pretty nice tie-ins for obviously fantasy, but also science fiction in some ways as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of Art Nouveau pieces are just very satisfying to look at in general. But yeah, one thing I kind of find or I like is I really like stained glass windows. And I feel like a lot of Art Nouveau paintings just kind of look like a stained glass window.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and I think it increases my enjoyment of it to just like, if I see this painting, because to some sense, especially if you're looking at something on the internet, right, which is already not really an ideal form to consume art, you can kind of like, normally you just see a painting and you imagine it as a painting, but it's sort of equally easy to just see a painting on the screen and imagine it as a stained glass window, and that kind of just buffs the painting for me. um so yeah, but
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, something that's kind of awkward about Art Nouveau is that most of the artists that Art Nouveau claimed did not claim Art Nouveau. Like they were just sort of meh about it. There are a lot of sort of like, I guess, theoreticians and philosophers that had a lot of big thoughts about Art Nouveau and what could be, but a lot of the artists that are considered Art Nouveau nowadays at the time were kind of just like, I just want to make a living, man. And in particular, one guy who was really in that camp was the person who will probably be the most featured artist in this issue, Alphonse Mucha. And he was basically this Czech guy with very big, fine artistic ambitions. And he tried to get into art school, and that didn't work. And so he ended up having to sell his soul to commercialization, basically. And it didn't happen immediately, but basically what happened is that he had been doing some art for a while, getting some patronage, and then there was this actress who was just like, "Hey yo, I'm having this show tonight and I need a poster. It's like kind of last minute, but like, can you make this poster for me? Just like make me look cool and stuff." And he's just like, "Say no more."
Mm.
And then he makes this poster that's like, I don't know, probably the most popular poster in like at least the history of French drama up until that point. And they just like hang up this poster everywhere, and it's so popular that people just like tear down the poster and want to hang it in their house because it's such a goated poster. And like I think pretty much everyone is very surprised by this reaction because the style that he painted it in was like his particular brand of Art Nouveau, which was not really a known style, and he didn't really have any idea that it would resonate with the public so much. But after he did that, people were just like throwing money at him. They're just like, do this again. And so he was just churning out these pictures of like, you know, beautiful women who kind of look like Greek nymphs in these like vibrant colors and floral scenes. And he made a lot of money. He got really famous. And it not only was he promoting his own brand, but because Art Nouveau claimed him, he was also sort of promoting the Art Nouveau movement by proxy, even though he didn't really believe in it all that much. And so all these Art Nouveau people were just like, you know, look how great it is that art can be embedded into like advertisements and decor and this and that. Like the line between fine art and low art is merging or is blurring. And he was kind of just like, I just want to make a living, man. I just want to make real art. Um, and so eventually he did get his wish. He got some money to make this really long painting series about his true passion, which was Slavic nationalism. And he made this, I think it was like this 20 artwork piece called the Slav Epic. And he was very excited about this work, and he presented it to the city of Prague. Like nobody really cared all that much, which is kind of a bummer. But to him, this was his real art, and all of his prints that were wildly popular in Paris were just kind of a side thing. So in some sense, it's weird for him to be a representative of Art Nouveau, but also just considering how Art Nouveau came about, I don't even think that was especially atypical. I think Art Nouveau kind of like to claim as many artists as they could get.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in some sense, I feel like it is sort of living the dream as an artist. Like he is kind of. It is pretty rare that you get an artist who's just like got some sort of personal style and whatnot, and then just start doing it and just start printing money. Like I feel like this almost never happens. Um, I guess to some extent, I think he needed to compromise on like the content of what he was doing, but it feels like he really didn't need to compromise on the style too much. Like he was able to just kind of do whatever to achieve commercial success, like already within what he wanted to do as an artist. Um, that's pretty cool. Uh, although, yeah. I mean, it's probably. I mean, I'm sure he was a bit peeved after doing that for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he wasn't totally bitter. I think there was some quote where he mentioned, well, I'm kind of bummed about the degree of commercialization of my art because he must have been seeing his art everywhere, like on like
Yeah.
cigarettes and like on posters. But he was like,
I
yeah,
saw the thing where he made like the Czechoslovakian national currency, so it's just like, even just like money in general, it's like his art, kind of a flex, but
yeah, but like you said, at the same time, I do kind of like that I'm bringing art down to the common man. It's not just this thing that only rich people can look at. So I think there was a little bit of Art Nouveau sensibilities inside of him. Now, one thing that really appeals to me about Art Nouveau is that it's made using lithography, which is sort of like this it's like flat printing technique, and I think his art style in particular is very, very flat. And I happen to really like flat painting styles. In fact, I would say that is maybe like one of the most single biggest predictors of whether I like an art style, because one of my other most favorite styles of art is Japanese woodblock printing, and like that is also a very flat and commercialized art form. I think there's a lot of interesting similarities between Art Nouveau and like Japanese woodblock printing. Like they kind of have a similar vibe, I guess.
yeah, for sure.
Like yeah, like obviously Japanese woodblock printing is not nearly as commercialized. I mean, like because a lot of muka paint or a lot of muka prints like literally have the name of like whatever they're advertising on it, which is not the case for Japanese woodblock prints. But still, like I think there's definitely some similarities there.
So do you just like in general kind of get annoyed at, I don't know, sort of like realist art that's really trying to cook with like the depth perception and stuff?
I mean, I guess I can appreciate it, but I feel like that kind of art was obviously much cooler before photography and stuff existed. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think that like when you have really flat pieces of art, you're kind of number one, I feel like you're kind of getting more of arts, like visual arts unique value. You're kind of like playing to the strengths of the medium or of the medium. But also, like you mentioned before, they also look a lot better on an internet screen, which is one of the main ways to which I can consume art, unfortunately. And so it has
Yeah.
that going for it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So the main, I guess I should stop calling these paintings. The main print that I picked out to headline this issue is The Seasons by Alphonse Mucha. There's a couple of different versions of this print, but the general vibe is the same. It's just like these four different nymphs that all personify the aspect of a certain season. So there's spring, summer, fall, winter, somewhat fittingly. And they all have pretty different vibes, you could say. Um, and I don't know how much of this was an explicit intention of Mucha, considering his attitude towards Art Nouveau, but it does represent an attempt to unify low art and high art, I think, because the seasons and having a little bit of a Greek classical influence on that as well is a very high art thing. There's so much art about the seasons, and then like Art Nouveau is sort of this more poppy art form, and so you could see it as saying like this kind of art can talk about the seasons and like Greco-Roman stuff as well, and like this is not just exclusively the domain of fine art. Or you could just see it as Mucha trying to get his back and making a banger painting because it looks pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, I thought this was pretty fitting for a number of reasons. Although I don't think that like Mucha really has any one work that's like very representative of his philosophy, I guess, because for him this was just sort of a side thing. I mean, if anything, it would be the Slav ethic, right? Which unfortunately, I do not think we will be featuring in this issue. Sorry, Mucha. It does look pretty cool though. Have you seen it? Have you seen it? Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Yeah, I was looking at it. Pretty cool. Unfortunately, on this podcast and magazine, less enthused by, the hope of a unified, like, grand Slavic national state. Um, so our goals are running a bit contrary to Buka's here. Um, anyways, moving from visual art to works of fiction, is there any work of fiction you particularly think of when you think of Rebirth?
Yeah, so the work that really comes to mind for me is The Egg by Andy Weir, which is a short story that is so different from The Martian and Project Hail Mary, also novels by Andy Weir, that it's honestly kind of hard to believe that the same dude wrote these things.
Yeah, I was like
Um,
really surprised when I learned this. I remember because yeah, I just like it had not computed in my head. Like even though I knew they were both Andy Weir, I had somehow gone a couple of years without even connecting that these are the same person.
uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, and basically what it's about is, I mean, spoilers, if you're going to go read it, these are spoilers. But it's about this person who dies and then they find themselves on this celestial plane where they're talking to God, basically. And God tells them that they are actually God. And how that is that they have had and will have, the temporal circumstances of this universe are not exactly clear, but in the due course of time, in the fullness of time, they will live out every single life of every human that has ever lived. And they will experience all the joy, the suffering, the good, the evil. They will experience all of these life experiences in full and live and die and be born again. And once all of that has been said and done in whatever temporal context the story takes place in, they will then be able to ascend and take their place amongst whoever these godlike beings may be. And they're still in this period of, I guess, like infancy where they're living through all of these lives. But after completing this stage of their life, they will be able to move on to the next stage. And I remember reading it, or I guess technically I consumed it as a video, like in Kurzgesagt video form on YouTube. But I remember it being very hopeful in a way that I have not felt about most other reincarnation narratives. Because not only does it feel like it gives your life a lot of meaning and purpose. Like I think in conventional reincarnation narratives, it's just kind of like, you know, your previous life, it's not like it didn't matter at all, but it's sort of not of super major consequence because you just forget about it. But in this, like, there's just kind of this understanding that every single life you live, no matter how significant, does somehow contribute to your maturation as this celestial being. But I think it also is able to kind of like recontextualize a lot of the past evils of history in like not necessarily a way that makes them seem not evil, but in a way that makes them feel less I don't know what the word is. I guess it sort of recontextualizes pain and suffering and evil in the world as something that's having this divine meaning as opposed to just being like chaotic and not necessarily having to happen.
Yeah, I really like this story as well. It's a very strange read in that it almost feels more like some sort of like religious text of like a cult or something than a sci-fi story in the sense of like I don't know, I feel like you can actually imagine believing this, and I actually knew someone through like high school at least who just like actually believed in this short story, like literally, as in like they believed the world created by this story was happening, which I feel like is a pretty wild thing to do with a sci-fi story. But I'm sure he wasn't the only person in the world who had this belief, basically. But yeah, I think it allows for a pretty hopeful outlook on the world. Like this dude was pretty compassionate, viewed other people with with warmth and whatnot, as other versions of himself through some different amount of reincarnations and whatnot. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I kind of agree in that I think a lot of reincarnation narratives sort of have this they feel sort of pointless, like at least
Yeah.
in Buddhism, for example. Like the whole point is to escape the reincarnation, right? The cycle of reincarnation is not considered a good thing, really, that you're like continually gaining stuff from each additional. Well, okay, that's not completely true. You're like, maybe you are continually gaining stuff, but like what you're working towards is some like just like leaving it, where the egg sort of had this view of like all of humanity together being the same being is working through these reincarnations to some greater plane, which yeah serves as kind of a pretty cool outlook for people to have.
Yeah, I think but yeah, I think the egg is definitely not the worst religion to have. And I think there's some similarities to like Hinduism in some ways.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. One thing I was thinking about when I was coming up with this theme is that obviously fantasy has some clear rebirth theming, being descended from mythology and all that. But I think speculative fiction is a pretty good vessel for rebirth, in that there are these two narratives that are very prominent in science fiction, which are the transcendence narrative and the renewal narrative. And I think that the egg is a pretty good representative of this transcendence narrative, where what you have is usually like an entire human society, but also sometimes an individual going through some change, usually technological or extraterrestrial, but it could be spiritual in this case as well. You have some entity ascending to some kind of higher plane of existence or understanding, and as a result they kind of like cast their humanity behind. And I think this is just a really canonical narrative in sci-fi specifically, that is, it kind of has to be sci-fi just based on the nature of this setup. And this has some pretty strong rebirth themes. The other one, renewal, I think this is obviously a type of story that can be told in more other genres, but I think in the context of sci-fi specifically, it's told in the form of like post-apocalyptic literature, or maybe you could even say post-apocalyptic literature, where there's some kind of disaster, often ecological but often societal as well, and there's some period of darkness, but then afterwards there's some kind of like new spring and renewal. And I think that this narrative is really closely tied into not only rebirth but also ecofiction and solar punk, which are very trendy genres in the sci-fi landscape right now. Those being genres that imagine optimism and utopia through the lens of the climate. And so I think all that is just really fertile ground for exploring rebirth. And yeah, like it's interesting that sci-fi happens to be so conducive for it.
yeah, yeah. Thinking about rebirth, a story that kind of comes to mind for me when talking about specifically the more renewal sense of rebirth is Seven Eves by Neil Stevenson. And yeah, because basically the setup for this story is the moon just kind of inexplicably explodes, and humans kind of have to try to survive. And it's basically a bunch of humans going into space and trying to survive for a long time until the Earth becomes habitable again. Um, and I think sort of like as you said, post-apocalyptic um, renewal narrative is pretty common in sci-fi media. Something causing the end of the world and then rebuilding it from the ashes. But I think Seven Eves was pretty interesting in that it's just a very technical book. Probably like the most I wouldn't say like difficult in terms of like hard to grasp type sci-fi ideas, but they de- he definitely goes the most in depth in actually doing the math in any book I've read, at least. And it's pretty interesting because it's just sort of imagining this future of humanity, and it's just like, okay, exactly how would you do this with whatever orbital mechanics are available to you and stuff. But then the second portion of the book is much more focused around kind of, I guess, like building this new society. Because well, okay, I don't know how much of the book I want to spoil here. But basically, like, there ends up being only 12 women, I'm pretty sure, that are the last 12 survivors of humanity, and create some offspring from editing or Wait, fuck.
Isn't it? It's at 7.
It's 7? Oh,
Because
it's
it's
7
seven Eves.
Eves! Holy it's 7 Eves! This isn't even a spoiler! It's literally in the fucking title! Holy shit! Um, okay, yeah. So there's 7. Oh my god. Why did I think there were 12? Okay, so there's 7 women which are referred to as Eves because it's 7 Eves, and Eves is like the first woman that's and whatnot, and then all of humanity is descended from her. So all of humanity is descended from these 7 people, right? But as a result, it kind of creates this like sort of caste based society formed from the different genetic identities of the descendants of these different people, and I don't know, the watching that evolve as they attempt to go back and reclaim the earth. But yeah, and anything you want to say about 70s? I'm actually
Did you not know that's why it was called that?
I
Or
literally did not know this. Yeah, until right now.
that's kind of cool. Do you think it's like a goated title now?
Yeah, I think that's a good title.
Well,
I mean,
because it's originally talking about the pieces of the moon.
okay. Maybe wait,
Because the moon like
because
splits into 7 pieces.
yeah.
But yeah, but actually it's like, oh, and it's a palindrome. Um,
Yeah.
but um, but yeah. I think with like 70s, I really like 70s. 70s is one of my favorite books. I think it was probably my like I would say it was probably like my second favorite hard sci-fi book. Now it's probably my third favorite thanks to reading Death's End. But I know that a pretty common criticism of Seven is that it's very unwieldy because there are kind of like 3 or 4 distinct parts of the story that have some time skips in between them. And in particular, the last part, like the 70s part, is just like way in the future. And I know a lot of people are kind of just like, yeah, this just doesn't really feel like it needs to be in the book, and it was kind of like unnecessary. Like the book would have just been a lot more satisfying and self-contained if they just ended it there, the genesis of this new civilization. But I think that the further away I get from having read Seven Eves, the more I like that's actually the main part of the book that I remember. I think that
Mm.
like I really obviously enjoyed reading all of the crazy orbital mechanic stuff and all the things that go wrong and go right in space, but like something about the end just really captured my imagination. Like this caste system with 7 people, and there's like this giant mega structure called the Eye that they use to like travel around. It's like super cool. And also like them going back to Earth is pretty cool as well. They kind of explore this world that is debatably habitable, and then encounter some humans that um, are still on the surface, and what's happened to humanity, stuff like that. Just like some really interesting concepts, and I think it's cool that Neil Stevens is just like, you know what, I did all this rigor for the rest of the book, and now I'm just gonna shit some ideas on you and see what happens. And I thought even the subplot where she's kind of just like going on her mission to Earth was like pretty entertaining, like in a different way from the rest of the book. But I was like invested. I thought it was like a real page turner actually. So I really like Seven Eves. I would highly recommend it. And I think that it's especially good if you like really, really big things.
Yeah. Yeah, I brought up 70s. I actually don't really think as highly of it as you do. I would say it might be the book I think about the most in relation to how much I enjoyed it. Or at least up there. Not that I didn't enjoy it. I thought it was like pretty good. But I do think I'm one of those people who maybe would have liked the book more as a whole without the second section. Although
Most people.
yeah. Although definitely parts of it were cool. And I think I really would have liked the book if it was just like 20 page. This was it would even be less natural, but it's just kind of like 20 pages of like sort of exposition into the society. Like I really enjoyed just the expository stuff in the second section of the book post time skip, kind of like what happened. And then once it got into more like actual plot, I was okay. Um yeah, I think the middle of the book though especially has some really strong moments.
Wasn't there kind of this whole like Mickey 17 thing going on in the ending section where
What do you mean by
okay, you didn't see that movie, did you? Like
no?
there's like clones of the main character and
Yeah,
have
yeah.
like died and stuff. Yeah. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in that last section.
Yeah,
Surprisingly
yeah.
be dense. I thought he was gonna chill out a bit, but
No, it was more idea dense because it was less like rigorous. Like
yeah,
like
yeah.
like the first section was very much I'm gonna have some ideas, but also just like, really take things to their logical conclusion. Where the next part was more like that throw them all in there kind of. Um,
Mhm.
which I think I actually tend to enjoy more. So I don't know. I don't know. Um,
You just really didn't like the plot.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. Me, I might have enjoyed it more if it was a separate book. I think it was. I did feel a bit jarred by it. I don't know
Yeah,
if
it's just kind of jarring. Yeah, I won't deny
yeah,
that. I mean, it's sort of like I feel like it also feels a little bit young adult, like something about
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Like it's not even written in a young adult way, but it's just like a kind of young adult character and narrative. It really reminds me of have you read Uglies by Scott Westerfeld?
I have not.
So like in Uglies, it actually there is a thing where there's just like this trilogy of Uglies books. And there's just like this fourth book that's like decently far into the future and kind of has like a similar vibe of like the transition where like it's really just not similar at all and the society's just like but like it is a separate book. It really reminded me of that. It's almost like if you combined the entire Ugly series into like one omnibus, I feel like you get a similar sort of feeling.
Yeah, I guess like the other thing is the first portion of the book. I mean, it sort of had a main character. I mean, there was like a most main character, but it was really like jumping between people a bunch and was kind of like this tale of humanity and just like, viewing like the people in humanity. Where the second section felt like much smaller in scope, sort of. And that it's like more focused on a single person and whatnot.
Mhm.
Um
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like it probably would have worked better as maybe like a smaller standalone book in some objective sense. But I feel like Neil Stephenson's probably just like, yeah, if I do that, no one's gonna fucking read this like other book. So I'm just gonna make people read my ideas.
yeah, I respect that.
Yeah,
I
I
respect
respect
it.
that as well.
I don't know. I think sci-fi authors have a right to imprint their ideas on their readers. Part of the job description.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But yeah, I think 70s would probably be my canonical example of renewal as well. Although I will say that I don't think I've read a book that I've loved in the sort of like hopeful climate fiction and renewal genre yet. I've read a few that are kind of adjacent that I've liked a bit, but I haven't read anything where I'm just like, that was as good as 70s. Um, but I was looking into the history of some of these narratives, and it was kind of surprising to me that a lot of these narratives seem to stem more from a single source than I was expecting. In particular, it seems like the transcendence narrative was almost entirely pioneered by Arthur C. Clarke, who is most famous for writing a 2001 or is probably most famous for writing 2001 A Space Odyssey, both helping write the movie and also the accompanying novel. But 2001 is just one of many manifestations of this narrative that he created throughout his life. Earlier in his career, he was much more of a short story author, and you can pretty much find a short fiction version of all of his novels. For 2001, you can find The Sentinel, um, and there's some other examples of these things. But probably his most influential novel in a literary sense is Childhood's End, which he wrote quite a bit of time before 2001. Like he wrote this in the 50s. It's really quite forward looking for its time. And it's about humanity encountering some kind of alien intelligence that shepherds them into their new era. And I guess somewhat interestingly, they are not able to ascend to the degree that humanity is. They're like a little bit envious, but their role is to kind of like take orders from some higher intelligence and carry humanity into their cosmic destiny. And yeah, I would say that like humanity's cosmic destiny and like the evolution of humanity from like the cradle of Earth into the stars is just the theme in Arthur C. Clarke's work. And you know, I have to credit him with that. Like it was a pretty influential theme that still gets told a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, he really cooked with that one. Um, I my dad is like a massive Arthur C. Clarke fan, and that isn't super surprising to me. I personally am not as much of an Arthur C. Clarke fan. He definitely writes in what I would call like golden age sci-fi English, which is it has a very distinctive quality. Like there's a lot of M dashes and like exclamations in conversations. Do you know like the golden age sci-fi exclamations?
Mhm.
They're just like I'm
Yeah.
trying to think of like an example. They're just like good God, but that would mean that blah blah blah.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like I feel like it kind of feels like screenwritten, like at times, in just like short stories and books. But like it's like telling some actor to like say this thing, but instead it's just like written down.
Yeah, yeah, and like I'm not saying that this prose style is even like objectively bad. Like there is some stuff that's kind of charming about it, but yeah, it's just like not really a style of writing that I love to read. And also, I would say that Arthur C. Clarke is just kind of like objectively not that good of a character writer. Like it's pretty telling that the most memorable character by far in 2001 is not a human.
Hmm.
And kind of what makes it scary is like it's like lack of human or memorable is like its lack of humanity versus like other things. I think Arthur C. Clarke's pretty good at writing like entities.
Non-human entities. Yeah.
But yeah, not necessarily men. So I think that Arthur C. Clarke is definitely one of the authors that would be in like Ursula K. Le Guin's crosshairs. But for a while he was considered to be like, yeah, if not the greatest sci-fi author of all time, at least like the greatest British one. But yeah, this I think that the one thing that I would say Arthur C. Clarke has over everyone still though is his ability to predict things. Obviously with this transcendence narrative he was kind of cooking. I think that what he was describing may yet come to pass, but he also had some interesting predictions regarding the communication satellite and also just how a space flight would work in general. Like sometimes you just have to take a second and remember that this dude is writing like a full 20, 30, 40 years before a lot of his followers, and you're just like, wow, this guy really was on, like he was writing some of this stuff during like World War II. It's kind of crazy. In fact, he said that what inspired him to write Childhood's End is like fucking like seeing the Blitz. He just like looked up and they're just like all of these German planes and shit. He's just like, oh, just like kind of an epic story, to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. It's pretty. That's pretty crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. See, he wrote that in the forward. Some of the takes in this book were like took me by surprise. Maybe not in a wholly good way. One interesting prediction that he made in the work is that South Africa would eventually be ruled over by an oppressive black majority after going through, I don't know, some indeterminate number of race wars. And one big moment in the novel is like the aliens are just like, okay, you have to like do these things to be like a moral civilization so that we can progress you, basically. And like one of the big things is that like the white people basically achieve like emancipation in South Africa. And this is like before black people even achieved emancipation. Like this is before apartheid was even like close to ending, right? And so nowadays, someone said something like that, you're just like, oh yeah, this is just white nationalist propaganda or whatever. But like, yeah, predicting something like that in the time is definitely pretty interesting. I'm wondering like how he would react to how South Africa discourse as has progressed. um, but another thing that was really took me by surprise was there was this part. Let me like find this passage. This really was kind of wild to me. He said, this is like a like from the perspective of some, I think, like a black character. It's like Jan Rodricks, though he seldom appreciated his luck, would have been even more discontented in an earlier age. A century before, his color would have been a tremendous, perhaps an overwhelming, handicap. Today it meant nothing. The inevitable reaction that had given early 21st century Negroes a slight sense of superiority had already passed away. The convenient N word was no longer taboo in polite society, but was used without embarrassment by everyone. It had no more emotional content than such labels as Republican or Methodist, conservative or liberal. Um,
Yeah, that's kind of insane. And then this is before like, wait, is this like before the N word? Was that when did the
this
N
is,
word become like adopted by the black community at all? This is before that,
I
I
don't know. I
assume,
mean, this
right?
was written in 1953, I think.
Yeah, but like I don't know when that happened though.
But I was like, bro's not even American. Like, why does he even have a take on this?
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty kind of a goofy book. I feel like there just wasn't really as much plot as I was expecting. Like, it's just kind of like nothing that humanity does really seems to matter all that much, which I guess is maybe kind of the point. But I don't know. Yeah, a very like it almost feels just like you're reading history, just
Hmm.
like fake history.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but yeah, one thing that I think the thing that bugs me the most about Golden Age sci-fi English is that a lot of times some like objectively perilous situation will happen and it's just like not does not feel perilous at all because of
Hmm.
just like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I remember I was reading like this one Asimov story where like they're objectively in like this life or death situation and someone that's like threatening to kill this other guy, and like even after this altercation happens and some person ends up dead, they're just all talking in this like weird way that makes it hard for me to take it seriously as though like an actual human death has occurred.
Yeah, yeah. Um yeah, there is like I don't know. I'm prone to occasionally making fun of some fiction for being just like interiority, interiority, interiority. But there's a reason stories include some amount of interiority. Like it kind of helps to get some amount of emotional reaction to things from the perspective of people to as a reader feel an emotional reaction to things, because it's pretty hard to like I feel like have a strong emotional response as a reader of something if you're not really even getting that from any of the characters who are supposedly actually there.
Especially if they're like aliens or some shit, which is was the case like in this particular situation.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that at this point, I think Asimov and Clark are probably overhated. I think that by the 90s, I think people had kind of gotten the point.
Mhm.
It's just like, yeah, these people had their shortcomings in like a literary context, but that's not really what they were trying to do. And so I don't think that it's necessarily fair to judge them in that context. Something I'm curious about is whether you think that, like, do you think that ideas in a work should be graded on a curve, sort of? Like, are Arthur C. Clarke's works better because of the time in which they were published?
uh, I think
Like, I feel like you could have, like, this is interesting. Like, I feel like you could have the take that, like, in the context of literary fiction, like, when it was published doesn't matter. But in the case of science fiction, it actually does matter because such a big component of it is coming up with, like, ideas that are predictive or speculative in some way.
yeah, I think I think you just have to like view it as somewhat different aspects of the book. Um, so like in terms of its enjoyment for reading, uh, it doesn't really matter, right? Because reading it now, it's like they're kind of like if the idea is common as a result of the book making it common still as a reader now if you haven't read it before but know the idea, it still feels like a common, not particularly unique idea. But in terms of like kind of viewing like rating the book as some objective quality, particularly as if comparing it to other books of the time, or thinking of the author. I think, like, especially I think like thinking of Arthur C. Clarke as a person, like less of the works. I would like give more credit to him as like an author than like, I mean, I didn't even read Childhood End, but if I read Childhood End and thought it was a 2 out of 5 book, but thought he was really cooking with the ideas, I might be like, okay, Childhood End, like, not the best book, but Arthur C. Clarke, like, really good author.
Have you read anything by Arthur C. Clarke?
I don't think so. I mean, outside of watching 2001.
Have you read 2001?
I have not read 2001.
I actually
I
liked.
may have read a short story, but
I actually liked 2010, the book, significantly more than 2001.
Huh.
Like, I mean, I think the movie just dissed the book pretty hard. You can't even say the book came first because it like didn't. But like, yeah, I actually did sort of like there's like some sort of interesting. I remember there being like sort of like fun conversations and stuff in 2010, and like just kind of like a weirdly good vibe. Like like it's interesting because it's just like from the POV of these random astronauts who like go to figure out like what the fuck happened with like Jim Bowman or whatever like disappearing into the monolith. So like it kind of like from their perspective, they don't know about all of this like weird like Star Child bullshit. They're just like, yeah, we're just trying to like figure out what happened, man. And they just like kind of are just chilling for a while. It's like not really what I was expecting from that book at all. So um so that's the origins of the transcendence narrative. I think that I was also surprised to find that there was a pretty canonical text in the context of renewal, which is A Canticle for Leibowitz by Walter Miller. And this book is basically about some kind of nuclear apocalypse and then like this Catholic order trying to make sense of humanity's destruction and rebuild. And it's told in like 3 parts that are split across time periods. It's unclear to me how pioneering this work was. Like, I'm pretty sure it wasn't quite as revolutionary as Childhood's End, but I, I, I think that it did pioneer the sort of like discovery of lost objects and treating them as religious artifacts. You know, like treating lost technologies as religious artifacts. Uh, I think that's a pretty cool invention. But I think it was also one of the first sci-fi books to try to make sci-fi wrap around religion, which is cool because that's not a super common thing that's done in sci-fi, but I think especially in the new wave, like with Gene Wolfe and some other people, they definitely tried to do this and were inspired by him. And I'm also curious how pioneering it was in terms of telling these stories in terms of these sections that right after time and then like this time and then like this way later time. Even though it's so old, like this structure is still very familiar. And I think this story is sort of known for also being better written, like not really in golden age sci-fi English, despite coming out I think around the same time. But I have not actually read this book. I've read part of it. I think that it is probably a book that seems way worse now because of the reasons you mentioned. Like, okay, now all these ideas are common, but at the time it was like, oh.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a pretty good time to wrap things up, I think. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.